If someone hurt your family, would you want vengeance? If you had a daughter, or if you had a sister and someone attacked your daughter or your sister, would you want vengeance? Well, that's exactly what happened in chapter 34 of Genesis. So we're going to briefly, as an introduction, talk about that. We're going to begin our study at the end of chapter 34 and go into chapter 35. Jacob's sons and daughters, he had a daughter and she went out, and one of the locals saw her, and he was a prince, and he attacked her and he raped her, and it made everybody angry and they didn't know what to do about it. Jacob didn't want any trouble, and so the boys took the matter in their own hands. And the guy that raped her decided he wanted to marry her, and they tried to work out a deal. And so they said, well, we can't just let her marry a heathen. You have to be circumcised. And so in the process of being circumcised and then becoming tender or sore, they committed vengeance. And you know what he did, right? When you commit vengeance, you kill people. So he killed them. Well, that brings us to verse 30. That is the gist of the story, and one day we'll go back and look at that. But I want us to look at Jacob's life and how things kind of affect Jacob's life and how he deals with heartache and trouble. And now at this point in his life, Jacob is a saved man. And so how does he deal with this? In verse 30 it says, then Jacob said to Simon and Levi, you have troubled me by making me obnoxious. Now some of your versions are going to say something different there, right? Make me what? You make me a bad smell or a stink or a bad aroma to the inhabitants of the land or to the people there. And so he understands that they don't like him because of what happened among the Canaanites and the parasites. I'm going to call them parasites. And since I have a few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me. I shall be destroyed, my household and I. But they said, should he treat our sister like a harlot? That's their defense. And I'm here to tell you it's a pretty good defense. Because what do they not have at this point? That's a question. They don't have what? They don't have the law. Right? When did they get the law? Moses brings the law. So they have some law, they have some teachings, but family is always important in the patriarch system. In the forming in the beginning, Genesis means beginning, and in the beginning of civilization, the beginning of coming together, and the beginning of God's covenants and calling His people out, family is very, very important. And so they take that and they ask a very legitimate question. Basically, they're saying, shouldn't we have defended our sister? Shouldn't we take vengeance on those that hurt our family? The key here, though, I want you to see is Jacob's attitude. And Jacob's attitude is not one that's very positive as a Christian. He's not worried about his daughter. He's not worried about his sons. Notice what he says. He says, and since I am few in number, it's about who? Jacob. Jacob has gone back after having made a covenant with God, after wrestling with God, after having received the blessing of salvation and swearing himself to follow after God and trust God and knowing that God's going to protect him. He says, I am few in number. And they will gather themselves against me, and they will kill me. What is he forgetting? He's forgetting the promise of God. He is forgetting that God has promised to watch over him and to protect him and to meet his basic needs. And God has a plan for Jacob. God's already told him. And so I read these verses and I think, well, certainly we wouldn't be like that. Certainly Christians today would not be like Jacob. And then I thought, man hasn't changed. Man has not changed in the thousands of years since God created man. We still think and reason, and our emotions are the same. So we do the same things. We come to Christ. We come in faith. We trust God. We promise God we're going to serve God. God, we're going to be your people. We're going to put you first. We're going to trust you to meet our needs. We're going to serve you. And then all of a sudden, things begin to change, not with God, but in our lives. And we tend to forget the things that we have promised God, and we tend to forget what God has said to us. And we become like Jacob. They're against me. They're going to destroy me. Woe is me. And the brothers begin to set him straight. His sons, shouldn't we have defended our sister? And the answer is yes. Should they have killed those? And the answer is yes. Preacher, how can you say that? Because they were sent away. Abraham sent someone to get Isaac a wife far from this land. Rebekah sent her son away to live with her brother to take a wife because Esau married someone that was causing them heartache. They didn't want someone there to marry their children. Christians and pagans should never marry. And so this is what you have. And they should have defended their sister. And so we come with that introduction to chapter 35. And God has to deal with Jacob over the things that have happened in chapter 34. And He has to remind Jacob of exactly who Jacob is. And from time to time, we need to be reminded of exactly who we are. We are God's children. We are children of faith. We trust God regardless of the circumstances. We should not be like the disciples in the boat, although oftentimes we are. When the storms of life assail us, we should not fear for our lives. We should always trust God, because if God says get in the boat and go to the other side, what's going to happen? The boat's going to make it to the other side. And if we just stay in the boat, we're going to be all right. But we tend to get out of the boat. And I don't care how good a swimmer you are, if you get in stormy waters, you're going to drown. Just ask Peter as he was sinking deep. Verse 1 of chapter 35, then God said to Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel, and dwell there. There is some kind of theology in those words. Notice what he says first. Then God said to Jacob. God has already changed his name to what? Israel. But he's having to call him Jacob because he's acting like Jacob. He's not able to answer to Israel because he's not acting like the child of God. He's acting like the pagan Jacob. And so he's reminding Jacob by the very calling of his name that something's wrong with who he is and how he's acting. And I dare say there are times that we need to be called pagan ourselves. Because most of the time, we don't act like Christians. And God says, arise and go to Bethel. And what does Bethel mean? The dwelling place or the house of God. Go to the house of God. Go to the dwelling place of God. And this is what I want you to do when you get there. What? Dwell there. Live there. Go back to the dwelling place of God and live with God. Go back to where you met God, where you wrestled with God, where you strove with God, you were striving with God for your salvation. Go back to that place and dwell there again. Because evidently you have forgotten what God has done for you. There is some kind of theology. Because we as Christians, we tend to forget that we fought for our salvation. Paul says it's not easy. We press to get in. We fight to get in. We hold to Christ. We push through the crowd like the woman with the blood issue to touch His garment, to hold on to His robe that we might be healed. And we fight for that healing, and then all of a sudden we think we can just drift away. And God says, go back and remember that you dwell with me. Dwell with me. Go to the dwelling place and make an altar there to God. What do you do with an altar? What's the purpose of an altar? To worship God. Thank you. You go there to worship God. Go there and build yourself an altar. Or in other words, go to where God dwells, dwell with Him, and worship Him while you're there. Man, too often we come to the place where we meet with God and we fail to worship. And we say, well, the music wasn't good. The preaching went too long, or preaching wasn't very well. It was terrible. And we focus on what people wear, or somebody was sitting in my seat. And we tend to miss that we're supposed to worship God from our heart. Worship is an issue of the heart that has to be prepared day after day after day of humbling yourself, of prayer, of scripture reading, of seeking God's face. And when you're prepared to come to worship, the music won't matter, the preaching won't matter, where you sit won't matter, what people wear won't matter. What matters is your relationship with Christ. So he says, come and worship in the dwelling place of God. Why is that important? He says, because Jacob, you remember who appeared to you when you fled for your life from your brother Esau. You were running for your life, you were fearful, and you came and you met God because you were fearful. Fearful. Such theology. And every time the disciples are fearful, Christ says, fear not, for I am with you. Fear not, peace be still. Fear not, for He is God. You come to verse 2, and Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, this is why we know that he's not walking with God. Put away the foreign gods. Can you believe a man that has wrestled with God, a man that has fought with God for his salvation, has to tell his household to put away their foreign gods? To get all that stuff out of the way, to get rid of everything that you're worshiping, get it out of the house. I mean, we wouldn't have that in our society today. I mean, our Christian people wouldn't have stuff we worship in our house, would we? I mean, we wouldn't have idols sitting up on a mount. We wouldn't have any kind of thing that would distract from our Lord, from our worship, from our worshiping the true and the living God. We just wouldn't have that. What could keep us from worshiping God? And then I think, praise the Lord, we're not playing Little League Baseball. Because it'll snatch people out of church, and they'll forget about Sunday morning worship in a heartbeat. And I think about college football now. And I think we'll go drive 100 miles, buy a motel room, or rent. I guess you don't buy it, right? You rent it. You rent the motel room. You'll buy your dinner. Buy this. What's the football ticket cost now? Anybody bought a ticket lately? How much? $90. How much? Yeah, college. Sure, they don't cost $9 to go watch the Knights. $75 to see Mississippi State play. We'll buy the motel room, or we'll rent the motel room. We'll pay $75. We'll eat out, and we'll do all that, and we won't come to church. What are we worshiping in our society today? What do we worship? And God said, get rid of all of these idols. And Jacob said, we need to get rid of them. He says to his household, put away the foreign gods that are among you. Purify yourselves and change your garments. Get rid of the gods. Take a bath. Isn't that something? Clean yourself up and put on clean clothes. Because we're going to the house of God. There's something different about a Christian. There's got to be something different about a Christian than the rest of the world. Because if there's nothing different about a Christian, then we're just like the world and we have nothing to offer. Nothing. Then you come to verse 3. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, to the dwelling place of God, and I will make an altar there to God, who answered me in the day of my distress. He's beginning to remember. And has been with me in the way which I have gone. He's really beginning to remember. So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods, and I like this verse. Notice what they give up. They gave away the foreign gods, which were in their hands, and all their earrings. Now, this is not ladies' earrings. Y'all ever watch Clint Eastwood movies? I love Clint Eastwood movies. Heartbreak Ridge, y'all ever see that? Y'all know what I'm talking about? He's a Marine instructor, drill instructor, right? And he's got this guy that's got this earring. Y'all remember that? And you know what he did with that earring? He caught that earring, what did he do with it? He pulled that earring out through the ear. I don't mean took it apart. I mean he snatched that earring out. Jacob said, give me your idols and give me those earrings. And he took them to an oak tree and he did what? He buried them. He buried them. And they left. And God's protection was upon them. And no one followed after them. So Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, verse 6, he and all the people who were with him. And he built an altar there and called the place El Bethel, God, the house of God, because there God appeared to him when he fled from the face of his brother. And then you come to verse 8, and you begin to get some more history. In verse 8, Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried below Bethel under the tree, so the name of the place was called, and there's the name. You can pronounce it any way you want to. In verse 9, God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Padam Aram and blessed him. And then verse 10, and God said to him, your name is Jacob. Your name shall not be called Jacob anymore, but Israel. He's going through this history. He's remembering. You come to verse 11. God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your body. The land which I gave Abraham and Isaac I give to you and to your descendants. Then you come to verse 13. Then God went up from him in the place where he talked with him. And then in verse 14 and 15, so Jacob set up a pillar in the place, and he talked with him, a pillow of stone, and he poured a drink offering on it and poured oil on it. And Jacob called the name of the place where God spoke with him Bethel. So he's repeating this history to remember, to remember. And I want you to see this. They journeyed from Bethel, and when there was but a little distance to go, Rachel gave birth, and it was a hard labor. And she died. Verse 19, so Rachel died and was buried on the way at what is now is Bethlehem. But what I want you to see there is where they buried her. You remember he worked 14 years because he wanted Rachel to be his wife. She was the prettiest of the two girls, and he really wanted her for his wife. And so when she died, by this point, the first tree they came to, the first place where she died, they buried her. But now you need to go with me to Genesis chapter 49. Because Jacob begins to grow from this point on. Before she dies, his view has changed. We'll start with verse 29. His brothers have come together. He's blessed them. Genesis 49:29. Then he charged them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ekron the Hittite. In the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham brought with the field of Hebron the Hittite as possession for a burial place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah, his wife. And there I buried Leah. What's so important there is how you change your opinions, how you grow, and how you mature as a Christian. When you go back and you study Jacob's life, when he first saw the girls, he looked at Rachel because of her outward appearance. By the time Rachel dies, the outward appearance wasn't what was important to him. And so when she died, he just buried her where they were, which turned out to be Bethlehem. But when Leah died, he had grown to love Leah. And this is the only time her death is mentioned. And he loved her so much that he carried her to the place of his family burial. And he buried her in the family cemetery. And he was buried beside her. Jacob's life is a model for us as Christians because he goes through every emotion that we as Christians will have. And we need to watch and study and understand that we're going to face the same circumstances. And we're going to make mistakes. And we're going to have to be reminded. And we're going to have to deal with issues in our life. Because if we don't, we could end up like Rachel, who stole, you remember what she stole? The idols of her family. And those are some of the idols that had to be done away with. And Leah didn't take them. She remained faithful and true to her husband and to the God Yahweh until she died. That's what we got to do. We have to be different. So let's stop right there. And let's look at our prayer list.